Israel and Palestine. Oh my. Are we really doing this? Are we sure this is a good idea? Probably not, but here we go anyway. Israel and Palestine, two tiny countries in Western Asia near the intersection of three continents in an area commonly referred to as the Middle East, that have been in almost constant conflict with each other going back at least 75 years. That said, several countries around the world have not recognized Palestine as an official country. Before we get into the similarities and differences, I think it's best to start with some history. But first, let's talk about the sponsor. Once again, Harry's is sponsoring my video, and I'm really excited because I use Harry's literally every day. It's the razor that I used to shave with, but you can shave your face, actually your whole body with it. And right now they have a special on this starter kit, everything you need for a smooth shave. So we're gonna check it out. Oh, it comes with this, which is a 5-blade German-engineered razor cartridge. Notice that weighted, textured handle. Oh yeah, we got some shave gel here with aloe and a nifty travel blade cover. So let's try this thing out, eh? And there we have it. You can get this travel kit for $3 by going to my special link that's in the description of this video. This is a $13 value. You get it for $3. Thanks to Harry's for sponsoring this video. Okay, so let's first get into some history here. Humans have lived in the area of modern-day Israel and Palestine at least as far back as 120,000 years ago. Around 15,000 years ago, many of these humans were becoming sedentary before it was cool. Not only that, they came up with this thing called bread that I'm a big fan of, and they invented another new thing called beer that, yeah. Anyway, in addition to archaeological evidence, much of what we know about this part of the world from this far back comes from stories documented in religious texts. In particular, the Hebrew Bible. According to religious texts, scholars estimate that Abraham, the dude we trace back the religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam to, lived maybe 3,900 years ago? But we really don't know. Ancient religious texts also refer to the land of Canaan and a people called the Canaanites. Although the Canaanites were likely a pretty diverse group of people that all lived in this area. During the period known as the Late Bronze Age, the Egyptian Empire controlled this area. Around 3,200 years ago, a group of people called Israel first appeared in Egyptian text. Later called Israelites, they emerged as a distinct group in Canaan that spoke ancient Hebrew and eventually believed in one God as the creator of everything. Around 2,900 years ago, two distinct kingdoms emerged in the area: the Kingdom of Israel and the Kingdom of Judah. Residents of both became known as Jews. Around 720 BCE, the Neo-Assyrian Empire conquered the Kingdom of Israel, leading to the exiles of Jews from the area. Less than 100 years later, the Neo-Assyrian Empire fell and the Neo-Babylonian Empire took over Israel. The Neo-Babylonian Empire also dominated Judah, but the Jews there revolted in 597 BCE, leading to the Babylonians and their allies besieging the ancient city of Jerusalem, which was the capital of Judah. After a second revolt, a few years later, the Babylonians completely destroyed Jerusalem, including Solomon's Temple, an ancient sacred site built during the reign of King Solomon. Over the following years, during a period known as the Babylonian captivity, the Babylonians had destroyed so much of Judah that a bunch of Jews left the area, pretty far north and east. The Babylonian captivity ended in 538 BCE when Babylon fell and the first Persian Empire took over Israel and Judah. After the Persian king Cyrus Cyrus the Great encouraged many Jews to return. Many, in fact, did, and they built a new holy temple in Jerusalem, known simply as the Second Temple. The Jewish province in the First Persian Empire was known as Yahud. During the Hellenistic period, Yahud became part of what had been Alexander the Great's empire, specifically the Ptolemaic kingdom and the Seleucid Empire, After the Maccabean revolt between approximately 140 BCE and 37 BCE, the Hasmonean dynasty kind of ruled itself as a Jewish state. Meanwhile, by this point, you might be wondering, where does Palestine fit into all this? Well, first of all, the word Palestine began as a word used by ancient Greek writers to describe this whole area that, yes, included Israel and Judah. The term Palestinian didn't become a thing until much later. Palestine is often based on the area described in old religious texts as the, quote, land of Israel, or the Holy Land, or the Promised Land. In the year 0, or perhaps 4 BCE, or BC, before Christ, I suppose, this Jesus dude was born in Palestine, specifically Bethlehem, although he grew up in a region called Galilee. Have you heard of him? Anyway, he was Jewish, but grew up to be quite an influential guy who debated with fellow Jews on how to best follow God. Eventually, he was arrested by Jewish authorities who turned him over to the Roman government to be killed on a cross. After his death, his followers believed he came back to life and was the Son of God, referring to him as Jesus Christ. These followers today are known as the first Christians. Today, Christianity is the world's largest religion, and it is the second major religion that originated in Palestine. But hold up, did I say Roman government? Why, yes, I did. By the time Jesus Christ was born, the area was in the Herodian kingdom of Judea, a client state of the Roman Republic, named after Herod the Great. After Herod died, the kingdom was divided among his sons, but the Jewish people who lived in the area didn't like Roman rule and often revolted, ultimately leading to the First Jewish-Roman War and a Roman Empire victory. During that war, the Romans destroyed most of Jerusalem yet again, including the Second Temple, which at the time had stood for 585 years. Even though the Roman Empire now had full control over the area, by the year 73, the Jewish people in the area continued to resist, hoping to once again restore an independent Judean state. These series of wars would continue on and off for another 63 years and devastated the Jewish population. After this devastation ended, most remaining Jews left to live elsewhere. The few who remained now lived in an area the Romans called Syria Palestina. The Romans rebuilt Jerusalem as a colony and called it Aelia Capitolina. After the Roman Empire dissolved and the Byzantine Empire carried on, Christianity became much more popular in the area, especially after Constantine the Great converted to the religion. During this time, Jews had legal equality, but in some ways were also discriminated against. In the 600s, Arabs who had recently started a new Abrahamic religion called Islam conquered the area. Over the next 3 centuries, the Rashidun, Umayyads, Abbasids, Fatimids, and Seljuks controlled the area, and Islam became the dominant religion there. Then there were the Crusades, beginning with the First Crusade in 1099. The Crusades were a bunch of religious wars started and supported by the Roman Catholic Church during the medieval period, with the goal of recovering Jerusalem and the surrounding area from Islamic rule. Interestingly, Jews and Muslims often fought side by side to defend their lands against these crusaders. Between 1099 and 1291, Palestine witnessed 8 different crusades, and there was at least some crusader presence in the region. In 1187, the Ayyubid dynasty nearly captured all of Palestine back, and after this, the Sultan Saladin invited Jews to return to settle in Jerusalem, and many took him up on the offer. From the late 1200s to early 1500s, the Mamluk Sultanate ruled over the area. In 1516, the Ottoman Empire conquered the area, and it remained under Turkish rule all the way until the end of World War I. Under Ottoman rule, Muslims, Christians, and Jews generally lived together in peace. During World War I, the United Kingdom took over Palestine and held on to it over the next 28 years under guidelines set forth by the League of Nations, which basically said they were under control by the United Kingdom until they were able to, quote, stand alone. Meanwhile, the modern Zionism movement had really got going. Zionism is a movement that calls for the creation and general support for a homeland for the Jewish people, who by the 1900s now lived in nearly every part of the world. Many Jews longed to return to their ancestral homeland, aka Zion, although early Zionists were often secular and even anti-religious. Many Zionists had the goal of reestablishing a Jewish homeland in Palestine and had already been returning to live there as far back as 1878. Jump ahead to 1917, and the British government issued the Balfour Declaration, declaring its support for a, quote, national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. At the time, few Jews actually lived in Palestine. In fact, in 1919, Palestinian Muslims and Palestinian Christians made up around 90% of Palestine's population. However, that would dramatically change over the next 2 decades, especially as anti-Semitism, or hostility against Jews, got worse around the world. During the 1920s and 1930s, hundreds of thousands of Jews moved to Palestine and began to buy up a lot of land there to farm. Some would even buy farms with Palestinian tenants only to kick those tenants off the land. Those who had already lived in Palestine generally were alarmed by this trend, and by this time had all united as a group that today we just refer to as Palestinians. Increasingly, Palestinians and Palestinian Jews clashed. After getting pressure from Palestinians, the British government began restricting Jewish immigration to the area. Tragically, these immigration restrictions coincided with the Holocaust, which was the genocide of around 6 million Jews across German-occupied Europe during World War II. In fact, the British government even prevented Holocaust refugees from trying to escape to Palestine. Mostly due to the Holocaust after World War II, more people than ever now were in favor of establishing a Jewish state in Palestine. The British tried to mediate between the Palestinian Jews, who wanted a Jewish state, and all the other Palestinians who wanted a unified Palestine under Arab rule. The British referred the issue to the newly created United Nations. The United Nations ultimately came up with a plan to divide Palestine into 2 countries, one Arab state and one Jewish state, and make Jerusalem an international zone, since Christians, Jews, and Muslims all have holy sites there. However, Arab leaders rejected the plan. Meanwhile, many Palestinian Jews had revolted by this time, led by militias like Irgun and Haganah. In 1947, all-out civil war, and things didn't get any better after Palestinian Jews officially declared independence on May 14th, 1948, and thus creating the State of Israel with the boundaries suggested by the United Nations. This almost immediately led to what's known today as the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. On one side, not just Palestine, but Jordan, Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, and Yemen as part of an organization known as the Arab League. And on the other side, Israel. Long story short, this war resulted in an Israeli victory and the expulsion of more than 700,000 Palestinian Arabs from their homes. Today, Palestinians refer to it as Nakba, or the catastrophe. It's important to bring up that the expulsions of Palestinians began even before the Arab armies arrived. In fact, they were nearly halfway done by then. Most of them moved into nearby countries and never came back. Not only that, Israel expanded its borders, and over the next few years, hundreds of thousands of more Jews moved in. Some who were actually fleeing persecution themselves in Arab countries as retribution for the Israeli victory in the 1948 war. The only areas that weren't controlled by Israel were the territories of Gaza, controlled controlled by Egypt, and the West Bank, controlled by Jordan. What's known as the Arab-Israeli conflict has been going on ever since. First, Israel had constant border disputes with Egypt. Due to this, Egypt was like, fine, we're gonna prevent your ships from having access to the Red Sea, and it blocked Israeli ships from having access to both the Straits of Tiran and later the Suez Canal. Due to this, Israel, with the help of British and French forces, invaded Egypt in 1956, ultimately leading to the Suez Crisis. Things cooled off between Egypt and Israel for a few years after this, and the straits and canals reopened, but by the 1960s, tensions were high again. In 1964, Arab leaders created the Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, with the goal of creating a unified Arab state across all of Palestine. In 1967, Egypt once again blocked Israeli ships from accessing the Straits of Tiran. This ultimately led to the Six-Day War, which did in fact last 6 days. Between June 5th and 10th, fought between Israel and Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and other Arab states. Again, Israel decisively won. Not only that, it gained territory, taking over the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, the Sinai Peninsula, and the Golan Heights, which it took from Syria. Afterward, the Arab League reaffirmed its commitment to a Palestinian state, but progress toward peace was made in 1978 with the Camp David Accords, which followed 12 days of secret negotiations between Egypt and Israel, with American President Jimmy Carter as a mediator of sorts. It resulted in Egypt getting the Sinai Peninsula back, and Israel and Egypt have mostly got along ever since. Even more importantly, this marked the beginning of a new trend. Ever since, the other formerly hostile neighboring Arab countries also have mostly made peace with Israel. Okay, well, except Lebanon and Syria. That said, within Israel, things have not always been so nice. Israel still militarily occupies the Golan Heights, and this is still disputed by Syria. It still occupies the West Bank, which, ever since the Oslo Accords, has been divided up into 3 zones. Area A, which is exclusively controlled by the Palestinian National Authority, or PNA. Area B, which is controlled by both the PNA and Israel. And Area C, which is controlled exclusively by Israel. Area A makes up about 18% of the land area of the West Bank, but has the biggest population. Area B makes up about 22% of the land area of the West Bank, and Area C, which is sparsely populated, makes up the rest. And finally, it still occupies the Gaza Strip. But for more on how, check out this video here by Beast Process. He just happened to release a video about the Gaza Strip at the exact same time as this one. Go figure. Okay, you got me. This is a collaboration. It's a collaboration. But yeah, subscribe to his channel while you're over there. It's great. Anyway, the Gaza Strip is also controlled by the Palestinian National Authority. Between the Camp David Accords and Oslo Accords, I should mention there was lots of violence. Much of this began with the increasing number of Israelis establishing several Jewish settlements throughout the West Bank, which the United Nations Security Council has called a, quote, flagrant violation of international law. In response to these Jewish settlements, as well as abuse by both the Israeli Defense Forces and Israel Police, the Palestinians have seemingly routinely revolted. Notably with the First Intifada, which lasted from 1987 to 1993, and the Second Intifada, which lasted from 2000 to 2005. Intifada is the Arabic word for uprising. Both intifadas began as protests, but ultimately ended up violent. In both intifadas, Israelis responded with great force. While thousands died on both sides, the vast majority who died were Palestinians. Meanwhile, growing frustrations that the PLO wasn't doing enough to help Palestinians led to a new, more extremist group in Gaza forming called Hamas. Hamas. Hamas formed during the First Intifada, and its military wing ever since has been responsible for numerous attacks on Israeli civilians. Due to this, several countries around the world have designated Hamas as a terrorist organization. Since the Second Intifada, Israel has generally become stricter on Palestinians, building more walls and checkpoints. It even built a wall completely around the Gaza Strip, and since 2007 has established a permanent land, air, and sea blockade of it, which has devastated its economy. Critics have called it an open-air prison. Today, things often are deceptively peaceful in Israel and Palestine. For the most part, residents carry on with their daily lives like there's no issues. However, every so often, violence does break out. It often begins with Hamas soldiers firing weapons, usually rockets, into Israel, and Israel responding swiftly with even more devastating airstrikes. Often, civilians are caught in the crossfire. Israel is actually often able to intercept and take down rockets shot by Hamas with its Iron Dome defense system. But hey, let's look at what Israel and Palestine have in common. Both are democratic. Well, kind of. Both have flawed democracies, but according to the Economist Intelligence Unit, Israel's democracy is much more free and fair. Both have great education systems and really high literacy rates. Residents of both generally view Jerusalem as the holy city. Many Muslims view the city as the spot where the Prophet Muhammad went up to heaven. Most Jews pray facing Jerusalem and hope that a third temple will still be rebuilt. One of the old retaining walls of the Second Temple actually still stands. It's called the Western Wall, and it's a big worship site for Jews. Speaking of Jerusalem, both Palestinians and Israelis claim it as the capital. Now, even though Palestine claims Jerusalem as its capital, Israel does control the city. Both don't have huge cities. Not counting Jerusalem, the biggest city in Palestine is Gaza City, and the biggest city in Israel is Tel Aviv, which is a pretty impressive place with the third largest economy per capita in the entire Middle East. Despite not having huge cities, both are very urbanized. For being in such a small area, both have a diverse geography with mountains generally in the north and desert to the south. There are the coastal plains in the west bordering the Mediterranean Sea. That's where most of the residents of both live. Much of the West Bank is part of what's known as the Judean Hills, but they're mountains, okay? There's the Jordan Valley, which revolves around the Jordan River. The Jordan River, which is quite significant to both Jewish and Christian history, makes up much of the western border of Israel and the West Bank. According to religious texts, it's where Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist, and before that, where the Israelites crossed to get to the Promised Land. It flows through the Sea of Galilee, which is actually a freshwater lake, and down into the Dead Sea, which is actually a saltwater lake. The Dead Sea? Yeah, the Dead Sea, which is the lowest point on the planet at 1,412 feet below sea level. It's also nearly 10 times as salty as the ocean, which is why you can float in it so easily. Oh, and finally, there's the Negev Desert in the south, where hardly anyone lives. In general, northern Israel and the West Bank have a temperate climate, and southern Israel and the Gaza Strip have either a semi-arid or desert climate. Both rarely get cold, although it occasionally can snow up in the higher elevations of the region. Along the coast, it has a nice Mediterranean climate. Go figure. Even in the north, rainfall can sometimes be scarce, but Israel is pretty smart with its water. It leads the world with both its drip irrigation technology as well as its desalination efforts. Desalination is the process of removing salts from water to make it suitable for human consumption or irrigation. Israel has some of the biggest desalination plants in the world, pumping water from the Mediterranean Sea. It's even doing this to refill the Sea of Galilee, which was shrinking, but now its waters are rising. Both Israel and Palestine are susceptible to earthquakes due to being located where the African and Arabian tectonic plates meet up. Both have similar laws regarding alcohol, although the drinking age is lower in Palestine, even though residents of both tend to use marijuana more than residents of most other countries in the world. It remains completely illegal in Palestine and only legal for medical use in Israel. For the rest of the video, we shall look at differences. But please do not stress these differences, okay? First of all, Israel has nearly twice as many people. That said, Palestine's population density is nearly twice as high. The official language of Israel is Hebrew, and the official language of Palestine is Arabic. The median age is much higher in Israel, although there are many exceptions. Israel requires all Jewish citizens to serve in the Israeli military for at least 2 years and 8 months. Israel is more religiously diverse. It may be no surprise for you to learn that around 74% of Israelis are Jewish, but hey, did you know that around 17% are Muslim, around 2% are Christian, and 2% are also Druze? Plus, as many as 20% of Israelis may be atheist. Now, if you're doing the math in your head right now and it's not quite adding up right, remember that you can be Jewish and also atheist, because Jews are an ethnic group and a religious group. Israel's law of return, which is the law that gives Jews the right to visit and be a citizen of Israel, says a Jew is someone with either a Jewish mother or who has converted to Judaism. Around 13% of Israelis identify as Haredi Jews, also called strictly Orthodox. They stand out as a group who are extremely traditional, with a strict adherence to Jewish laws. They also, controversially, get special treatment by the Israeli government and don't have to serve in the military like all other Jewish Israelis. Sunni Islam is the clear majority religion in Palestine. The life expectancy is much higher in Israel. This is probably related to the fact that Israel has a much better universal healthcare system that makes it easy for citizens to get medical services. In theory, Palestine has universal healthcare as well, but its healthcare system often struggles and is constantly short on resources and funding. And yes, Israel is a much wealthier country overall. Its GDP per capita is more than 13 times higher than Palestine's. Palestine has a higher poverty rate. But hey, the cost of living is higher in Israel, but this is mainly due to Tel Aviv. Once you get out of Tel Aviv, it gets much cheaper in Israel. Palestine has much slower internet, and a big reason why is, Israel. Major industries in Israel include technology, pharmaceuticals, aerospace, and communications. Major industries in Palestine include textiles, cement, quarrying, and food processing. Obviously, tourism is also quite big in Israel. Israel actually collects taxes on behalf of Palestine and distributes it to the PNA. In recent years, the Israeli government has withheld tax revenues it has collected as compensation for Palestinian, quote, attackers against Israel. Since 2007, Palestine has been governed by two separate administrations. One in the West Bank, which is currently controlled by the more left-leaning Fatah political faction, and one in the Gaza Strip, which is currently controlled by the more right-leaning Hamas political faction. Fatah and Hamas have historically not got along, and this even led to violence back in 2007 and 2008. While Fatah and Hamas both have the goal of a unified, independent Palestine based on the pre-Six Day War borders, Fatah recognizes the legitimacy of Israel and Hamas does not. Fatah is also generally more secular and Hamas more Islamist. Being a Jewish state, many people mistake Israel for a theocracy, but it actually has a parliamentary democracy. Israel's government even has an Arab Islamist party. Israel does continue to refer to itself as the nation state of the Jewish people, though. As I referenced earlier, Israel is not made up of all Jews, but Palestine is also not made up of all Arabs. Just around 86% of Palestine identifies as Arab. It's likely Israel has nuclear weapons, and they began developing them after the Six-Day War. Palestine, yeah, does not have nukes or any weapons of mass destruction. Google Maps doesn't label Palestine, and while you get Google Street View for much of Israel, you often don't for Palestine. Over the past few decades, Israel has been accused of violations of international human rights law regarding how it treats residents of the occupied Palestinian territories. And perhaps this is how I should end the video here. Israel is a beautiful country with wonderful people, the vast majority now here having little direct connection to the historic conflicts in the region. However, there is no denying the disparities we see today between Israel and Palestine. Palestine is often far behind Israel according to every standard of living metric, and the Israeli government has far superior military capabilities compared to the Palestinian Liberation Army or Palestinian militias. Because of this, we have seen much more Palestinian civilian casualties in recent years than Israeli casualties. Something has to be done to stop this, but there is no easy answer. One thing is for sure, the rest of the world often is closely watching what is going down in this tiny yet extremely important region. As you could imagine, this was not an easy video to make, and I put off making it for that reason. But I did have some help. 3 people looked over my script, and I want to give them a shout out now. So thank you to Jacob Friedman and also Sam Aronow, who has a Jewish history YouTube channel and lives in Israel. And finally, Beast Process also looked over the script. He is a Palestinian American, and yeah, he's the one I'm collaborating with for this video. So don't forget to check out his channel and his video about the Gaza Strip, which I've put up over here. So which is better, Israel or Palestine? On second thought, don't answer that. Just don't. Instead, how about let me know about other places you'd like me to compare for this series, eh?